Hello everyone, my name is Elise Sustko, and this is my master's project exploring Pottermania, the influence of the postmodern sacred in American mass culture. I'd like to take a moment to thank my advisors for all of their support and assistance with this project. Dr. Howe and Dr. Garces Foley, thank you so much. My paper discusses how religion influences culture, using the Harry Potter series as an example of how mass culture can subvert religious hierarchies. I will examine how Rowling blends the concepts of good and evil, fate and free will, the soul, and magic with the Christ figure, all of which are generally present in the Christian and pagan traditions but vary in their specifics. I will analyze how Rowling brings together the seemingly different elements from these religious traditions in a way that feels both familiar but also exposes religious hierarchy in American culture. M. McCavan writes, "We live in a world of the virtual, in which the media permeates everything and everyone." People within a society normally take their own culture for granted. They rarely question the structures governing their lives. It's very hard to see the mechanisms that create, reproduce, and substantiate your own culture. Because you are a part of it, it becomes naturalized to you. The job of cultural theorists is to pull apart and analyze the what and the why of culture in order to defamiliarize these processes. I'll be discussing the idea of culture in the Marxist sense, which is what people produce and the manner in which they produce it. The whole idea of culture is wrapped up in the system of production. Capitalism, which supports the exchange and sale of products for consumption, acts as a base for the superstructure, or culture itself. As a result of the intersection between production and capitalism, there is an industry devoted to the manufacturing and sustaining of culture, the culture industry. The culture industry, or the base, works to produce objects of mass culture, which we will define as objects that transmit information across a large group using mass media, which typically includes television, radio, film, newspapers, books, magazines, and increasingly the internet. Because mass culture reproduces and reinforces the norms and ideologies of the superstructure, it can be used as a tool of control by reinforcing and reproducing social hierarchy. Consumers are socialized to consume in particular ways that promote ideologies suitable to the sustainability of the base. These processes work together to maintain a culture, but work without our knowledge. However, objects of mass culture do not signify monolithically, and we can read them in multiple ways. As products of cultural logic that has internal flaws or contradictions, mass culture often reproduces those fault lines, which the cultural critic can show or exploit. Such habits of reading can show how objects of mass culture can serve to resist the very systems they typically reify. The analysis of such objects will invariably reveal structures that would otherwise remain invisible, yielding information about our culture that we would otherwise be unaware of. In the case of contemporary American mass culture, the Harry Potter franchise recently underwent over a decade-long span of mass appeal. The Potter series' staggering popularity, a worldwide literary phenomenon and prompter of Pottermania in the United States, suggests that something within the series clearly resonates with readers. Yet the series also generated profound critique, largely from Christian conservatives. If we do our job as cultural theorists, we must not take Harry's popularity for granted. We must consider what invests the series with such power and what relevance it has to dominant American ideologies. Although the Potter series does serve to support many social hierarchies, it contains subversive elements as well, particularly in its pastiche of religious imagery from apparently divergent traditions. The blending of religious elements, in this case Christianity and paganism, complex terms which are, for the purposes of this paper, used in the broadest of senses, creates a mixture that I shall refer to in M. McCavan's terms as the postmodern sacred, or a postmodern version of religious traditions. The blending of these traditions appears vaguely comfortable and familiar to consumers as it reproduces elements that have been, themselves, endlessly reproduced until they have become normalized within the culture. Though seemingly disparate, this mixture serves to make religious elements culturally pervasive. We don't recognize things as Christian or pagan anymore, they're just normal, background. Despite this familiarity, the Potter series has been vigorously condemned by Christian conservatives. On the one hand, the series has mass appeal to a broad range of people, but on the other, it produces extreme discontent. How can these conflicting reactions cohere? Because while the series maintains some status quos, it works subtly to critique others, maximizing its appeal and yet causing a problem for those who are threatened by the possibility of religious pluralism. This combination levels the authority of these individual narratives. They no longer function as a hierarchy. The postmodern sacred renders them equal. According to John Killinger, author of The Life, Death, and Resurrection of Harry Potter, in 2011 the Potter novels approached 400 million copies sold, and they have been translated into more than 60 languages. Rowling's books have the most remarkable publishing record of all time, except perhaps for the Bible and a handful of other holy texts. For those of you who aren't sure of or can't appreciate the magnitude of Pottermania, here are some facts and figures. First, American publishers paid $105,000 for the manuscript of the first novel. That is the highest ever paid figure for a children's book and for a first-time author. The second novel debuted at number 1 on the New York Times bestsellers list, a first for any children's book. Then, the first 3 Potter novels rotated in the top 3 spots on the list for over 80 weeks, which actually led to the splitting of the bestsellers list into categories. The entire series met with this level of success, breaking many records. The Potter franchise also released 8 feature-length films. Every one of the films reached the top 5 spot or better for the highest-grossing film in the year of its release. And all of the movies are in the top 100 grossing movies of all time, as shown in the chart. The movies were also cleverly marketed to coincide with book releases so that each year something pertaining to Harry Potter was released. This generated a profound and long-lasting fervor over the series, which lasted over a decade. The franchise also sold a vast array of merchandise to fans. Everything from replica wands, costumes, models of Hogwarts, brooms, candies. The list goes on and on. Anything from the series that could be reproduced and sold was. Harry even has his own theme park. The Wizarding World of Harry Potter opened at Universal Studios in Orlando, Florida in 2010. It features many Potter-themed rides, shops, and experiences. Additionally, there is now a Harry Potter exhibition which has traveled around the world, featuring many of the props, costumes, and other artifacts used in the 8 films. Melissa Anelli writes that the Potter series is a worldwide enterprise that has been crammed into every crevice of popular culture, and has become so absorbed into pop culture that it appears inside other pop culture references. Here's an example, a clip from the popular television show The Simpsons. This is just one example of the pervasiveness of Harry Potter in popular culture.
And Harry Potter and all his wizard friends went straight to hell for practicing witchcraft. Yay!
Next, I would like to show you a brief synopsis of the Potter series. This is a funny video clip called Harry Potter in 99 Seconds, and it's a brief synopsis through a YouTube clip.
There once was a boy named Harry, destined to be a star. His parents were killed by Voldemort, who gave him a lightning scar. Yo, Harry, you a wizard. Harry goes to Hogwarts, he meets Ron and Hermione. McGonagall requires he play for Gryffindor. Draco is his daddy's boy, Quirrell becomes unemployed. The Sorcerer's Son is destroyed by Dumbledore. Ron breaks his wand, now Jenny's gone, and Harry's in mortal danger. Tom Riddle hides his snake inside his ginormous secret chamber. Harry blows up and Marge. The Dementors come and take charge. Lupin is a wolf, the rat's a man, and now the prisoner is at large. They use time travel so they can save the prisoner of Azkaban, who just so happens to be Harry's godfather. I don't really get it either. Harry gets put in the Triwizard Tournament with dragons and mermaids, oh no, Edward Cullen gets slayed, he's back. Harry, it's getting scary. Voldemort's bad, you're a revolutionary. Harry, Dumbledore, why is he ignoring your constant attempts to contact him? He is forced to leave the school. Umbridge arrives, Draco's a fool. Kids break into the ministry. Sirius Black is dead as can be. Oh, split your soul. 7 parts of a whole. They're Horcruxes. It's Dumbledore's end. There once was a boy named Harry who constantly conquered death. But in one final duel between good and bad, he may take his final breath.
Harry Potter is born to wizarding parents who are then murdered by Voldemort because he hears a prophecy that says Harry will be his downfall. Harry escapes with his life and spends the next 11 years growing up thinking he is normal. At the age of 11, Harry discovers that he is a famous wizard and attends wizarding school. He spends the next 7 books trying to foil evil plots that all aim at reinstating Voldemort to power. Eventually, Voldemort does come back, and Harry must vanquish him. Unfortunately, that requires Harry giving up his life, which he does, but luckily for us, he manages to escape death and returns to finish off Voldemort. Now that you are familiar with Harry, let's talk a bit more about the term postmodern sacred. The term describes the version of religion portrayed by the media and consumed by the masses. It draws on these normalized versions of religion, blending elements from different traditions, breaking down normative ideology. This poses a threat to the centrality of a norm, which is why many conservative religious groups, namely Christian conservatives, advocate so strongly against objects of mass culture that exhibit the postmodern sacred. The Harry Potter series is an example of a postmodern sacred blending in that it demonstrates the collapse of polarized religious traditions into a merged postmodern version. If we examine the series closely, there are many examples of a postmodern sacred framed in a manner that destabilizes religious hierarchy. In these scenes, Rowling offers these seemingly incongruent elements equitably. She refuses to privilege either the Christian or the pagan, choosing to circumvent the hierarchy altogether. We can read these moments as subversion in that they promote cohesion rather than difference, implying that neither tradition has a singular claim on truth. This, of course, runs counterintuitive to the belief that Christianity has a strong hold on truth in American culture and subtly critiques not only this dominant ideology, but also the systems in place that maintain it. Now we'll examine instances of the postmodern sacred blend in the texts. On the surface, an epic battle between forces of good and evil move the plot, and Rowling clearly privileges good. The conflict between the Order of the Phoenix and the Death Eaters makes the story. It sets up the binary of good and evil, with both forces working to overpower the other. In the Christian tradition, believers engage in a continual progression toward goodness. It seems easy to write off Rowling's story as supporting this binary vision. But if we look deeper, examining good and evil on a character basis rather than as groups of conflicting people, it complicates the binary. Since evil in the pagan is not the opposition of good, but rather a neutral balance of the two forces, Rowling uses this view of good and evil as counterparts and applies it to her characters. Though many of the characters display this blending, I will focus on 3 of the primary characters: Harry, Dumbledore, and Snape, and the manner in which they project this balance. Rowling's incorporation of good and evil as both oppositional on the surface and balancing exemplifies her use of a postmodern sacred blend to subvert hierarchical ideas about religious traditions as produced by mass culture. Although he represents a superior level of goodness, Harry must often balance his desire to do the right thing with his natural human tendencies toward anger, jealousy, hatred, and deceit. Harry feels anger, and rightfully so, with many of the characters who mistreat him. He feels hatred towards Snape, Malfoy, his relatives, and at times he even becomes angry and frustrated with his friends. Our protagonist clearly contains a balance of good and evil tendencies, making him an example of this postmodern sacred blend. Readers view Dumbledore as the ultimate paragon of goodness throughout the series. He works tirelessly to thwart forces of evil and to support our hero on his journey to defeat Lord Voldemort. After his death, a reporter writes a tell-all memoir of Dumbledore, challenging our notion of him as a benevolent figure, revealing Dumbledore's alliance with Grindelwald and his plot to overpower and rule the wizarding world. Rowling complicates the construct of good and evil as clear-cut, separate identities by showing us that even in the most loved, trusted people, there is a balance of good and evil. Harry never trusts Snape. Other characters intimate that he has a proclivity toward the dark arts, and we learn that Snape was a former Death Eater, making our view of him as an evil character even more substantial. At the end of the series, we learn that Snape loved Harry's mother from childhood and worked as a double agent for Dumbledore after her death, risking his life every day to save her son. Although he makes it easy to dislike him throughout the series because of his evil actions, in the end he is possibly the most heroic character, making him a complex blend of good and evil. As recipients of endless reinforcement of the Christian good-evil binary via its proliferation through mass culture, readers find this concept familiar and thus appealing. This is why we love the story. The postmodern sacred blending reaffirms the importance of the normalized good-evil concept while subtly deconstructing it by blending it with the pagan version of balance, toppling the Christian hierarchy. Rowling approaches the seemingly dissimilar concepts of predetermination and free will by interweaving them to create a postmodern sacred blend. While Christians maintain that humans have free will, many pagans accept the possibility of fate or destiny. We see this primarily in the way Rowling blends the idea of Harry's destiny as the chosen one with his choice to accept this destiny. But can Harry do both? If he has a destiny, does he really have a choice in accepting it? In Rowling's world, the answer is yes. When Harry hears the prophecy, he exclaims that it might not be his destiny to defeat Voldemort after all, and Dumbledore replies, "You are forgetting the next part of the prophecy, the final identifying feature of the boy who could vanquish Voldemort. Voldemort himself would mark him as his equal, and so he did, Harry. He chose you, not Neville." Yet he contradicts himself again in Book 6. You see, the prophecy does not mean you have to do anything, but the prophecy caused Lord Voldemort to mark you as his equal. In other words, you are free to choose your own way, quite free to turn your back on the prophecy. Again, we see this blending of choice with fate. Harry has many opportunities to shirk this prophecy or destiny, but he doesn't. The very first choice that Harry makes in accepting his fate is entering the wizarding world. In Book 1, Hagrid notifies Harry that he is a wizard. As Hagrid shouts to Uncle Vernon, who insists that Harry will not be attending Hogwarts, "If he wants to go, a great muggle like you won't stop him." Though subtle, that "if" implies that Harry has a choice. He can remain in the muggle world, or he can venture into the strange new wizarding world. Of course, Harry chooses the latter. This marks his first decision to accept a fate, a paradoxical but effective blending of the two concepts. When Harry purchases his wand, one of the most important aspects of his magical identity, the owner of the shop states that it's really the wand that chooses the wizard, of course. Harry's wand shares a magical core with Voldemort's, linking them even more intimately than the prophecy and the scar on Harry's head. This scene highlights the blending of destiny with free will because it seems unclear just who chooses whom. Does Harry choose the wand, or does the wand choose Harry? Rowling muddies the idea of fate and free will here, so we cannot say it is either. Rather, this scene illustrates a blending that privileges none. Upon arrival to Hogwarts, students are sorted into houses. Hogwarts has 4. 1, Slytherin, is historically associated with evil wizards. When Harry places the sorting hat upon his head, he has one thought: not Slytherin, not Slytherin. Although the sorting hat tells Harry he would do well in Slytherin, Harry continues to plead against this. The sorting hat finally places Harry in Gryffindor. We can view this as Harry's first official choice to follow the path of goodness, his destiny, by begging the hat not to place him in Slytherin, which is a conscious choice for good. Harry later has doubts about truly belonging to Gryffindor, and Dumbledore states, "You happen to have many qualities that Salazar Slytherin prized. Yet the sorting hat placed you in Gryffindor. You know why that was." Harry answers because he asked it to which Dumbledore responds, "Exactly, which makes you very different from Tom Riddle. It is our choices, Harry, that show us what we truly are, far more than our abilities." This sounds like Harry has a choice, but Dumbledore seems to contradict this statement by pointing out that Harry pulled out the sword of Gryffindor when battling the basilisk, stating only a true Gryffindor could do that, implying destiny or fate. Rowling complicates the relationship between destiny and free will, refusing to take a definitive stance either way, and thus equalizing the role of both concepts in Harry's world. Therefore, these choices to embrace his destiny in fact create his destiny, again a paradoxical concept. The final example of Harry choosing his destiny occurs in Book 7. The prophecy suggests that in the end, Harry and Voldemort cannot both live. One must kill the other. Harry discovers to his horror that the final Horcrux exists in him. He represents the Horcrux that Voldemort never intended to make. After hearing this revelation, Harry fully understands his fate. Harry understood that at last he was not supposed to survive. His job was to walk calmly into death's welcoming arms. Harry has a choice: to sacrifice himself for the good of humanity or to run and hide. If he chooses the latter, Voldemort will continue destroying the world Harry loves. Remarkably, Harry thinks, it did not occur to him now to try to escape, to outrun Voldemort. It was over, he knew it, and all that was left was the thing itself, dying. Again, Harry chooses the prophecy. This version of the postmodern sacred serves as yet another example of the series' ability to subvert religious hierarchy. Although its inclusion confirms a sense of familiar religious elements, it also deconstructs social hierarchies it was meant to preserve. Over the course of the 7 books in Rowling's series, we see repeated references to the soul and its capabilities. Rowling combines elements from both the pagan and the Christian traditions, once again incorporating a postmodern sacred blend. When discussing Horcruxes in Book 7, Hermione states, "Look, if I picked up a sword right now, Ron, and ran you through with it, I wouldn't damage your soul at all. Whatever happens to your body, your soul will survive, untouched." This follows the Christian idea that the soul has an existence outside of the body and that it remains intact upon death. It also supports the pagan concept of the spirit in the same way. In Book 3, Professor Lupin discusses the removal of a soul. He states that the person's entity disappears. They become a mere physical shell. You can exist without your soul, you know, as long as your brain and heart are still working. But you'll have no sense of self anymore, no memory, no anything. You'll just exist, an empty shell, and your soul is gone forever, lost. In Book 6, Harry and Dumbledore discuss how Voldemort could live without part of his soul. Dumbledore implies that the soul does not merely exist, but also that it represents the part of a person that makes him or her a conscious being. Dumbledore points out to Harry that the 7th piece of Voldemort's soul, the only bit not turned into a Horcrux, was the part that lived a spectral existence for so many years during his exile. Without that, he has no self at all. Again, this idea follows both traditions. Also in Book 6, when describing the making of Horcruxes, Slughorn states that a Horcrux requires an act of evil, the supreme act of evil, by committing murder. Killing rips the soul apart. However, Rowling makes it clear that the soul is supposed to remain intact and whole. Splitting it is an act of violation. It is against nature. Here we see ideas present in the Christian tradition, immortality of the soul, the ability for good or evil, but they are mixed with the manipulation of that immortality by tampering with the soul through magic associated with paganism. Again, we see this represented as a blend. Rowling also blends these traditions in her depiction of the afterlife. Rather than define the afterlife, which would require her to ascribe to a particular religious tradition and assign a judgment value on which has authority, she offers a few glimpses at her version of the afterlife. The first we encounter is in Book 5 in the Department of Mysteries. Harry enters a large room that resembles an amphitheater with a large stone dais containing an ancient-looking archway. The archway contains a tattered curtain blowing continually in a breeze. When Harry approached it, he had the strangest feeling that there was someone standing right behind the veil on the other side of the archway, and he could hear whispers. Later, when Sirius dies, he disappears through the veil, never to return. Although Rowling never directly states this, we infer that this veil symbolizes the separation between the living and the dead, and upon death, the soul departs this realm and goes on. After losing his godfather, Harry questions one of the Hogwarts ghosts about the afterlife. The ghost tells Harry that only wizards have the ability to leave an imprint of themselves upon the earth, to walk palely where their living selves once trod. I am neither here nor there. Harry asks if his godfather will return, but the ghost replies, "He will not come back. He will have gone on." Of course, not having gone on himself, the ghost cannot answer what that signifies. But as readers, we recognize this idea of going on as departing to another realm. Heaven? It matters not. What matters is that the soul has the capability to exist beyond the body and move into another sphere of existence, although remaining as a ghost requires magic, again blending pagan with Christian. We see another reference of the afterlife in Book 7, after Harry sacrifices himself for the others and allows Voldemort to kill him. Harry awakens in some other realm. In this place, Dumbledore appears to Harry. When Harry asks if he has died, Dumbledore replies, "That is the question, isn't it? On the whole, dear boy, I think not." When Harry asks where they are, Dumbledore replies that he was going to ask Harry the same question. He says, "This is, as they say, your party." When Harry asks if he must return, Dumbledore tells him that he has a choice. He can return or he can go on. The use of the soul and afterlife within the series draws on both traditions, refusing to comply with either Christian or pagan. Rather, it favors both equally. In the instance that the soul exists, it follows both traditions, but in the manifestation of the soul and the qualities it possesses, it combines the two. Instead of complying with either tradition, Rowling creates a hybrid, allowing readers to escape the religious hierarchy reproduced and normalized by the culture industry, while yet retaining a semblance of the familiar and thus appealing concepts of the soul and afterlife. We will move into my final example of Rowling's use of a postmodern sacred blend. She equalizes the importance of Harry's magical abilities, which are strongly associated with paganism, with his role as a savior or Christ figure. Although she appeals to the familiar through the inclusion of these religious elements within the series, she destabilizes the hierarchy that privileges Christianity over paganism. As Killinger points out, Harry, like Jesus, was marked from birth. Harry and Jesus share prophecies that serve as portents for their ability to save mankind from great evil. After Harry's birth, Voldemort attempts to find and destroy Harry, which Killinger relates to the Mythian story of the Massacre of the Innocents. Lord Voldemort has similarly sought to slay the child whose coming threatens him, but fails. Also like Christ, Harry's arrival leads to a time of celebration and joy. The most convincing argument Killinger makes regarding Harry as a representation of the Christ figure lies first in Harry's willingness throughout the novels to sacrifice himself for others who are in danger, and in the end to give his life to save them, which is extraordinarily Christ-like. Secondly, and most convincingly to myself in reading the novels, was Harry's return from death, directly symbolizing Jesus' resurrection after the crucifixion. Although we can view Harry as a Christ figure, we must not forget that he is also a magical being. The fact that Harry embodies both of these seemingly contradictory qualities goes back to the center of the debate that these books have generated in the press. While the pagan tradition embraces the practice of magic, the Christian tradition states that magic in any form is evil. Rowling threatens the religious hierarchy by blurring the absolute binary between Christianity as good and magic as evil. In this case, a being that is supposedly evil because of his ability to perform magic also serves as a figure of supreme goodness. The books confuse the strict Christian division, which implies that magic equals evil. Harry, the Chosen One, savior of muggles and magical creatures alike, is also evil because he does magic, which problematizes the conservative Christian perspective completely. Harry cannot be both good and evil in the Christian framework. Rowling exposes that this hierarchy exists, which makes her work more subversive to the purpose of mass culture, which seeks to make the processes of normalizing religion invisible. In conclusion, Harry Potter, one of the most prevalent cultural icons in the last few decades, offers an excellent framework for examining an object of mass culture and how it reinforces social hierarchy, but also subverts it. The Harry Potter series illustrates an object of mass appeal that contains a postmodern sacred blend. In this case, the blending critiques religion in American culture to show that first, a hierarchy favoring Christianity exists, and secondly, to reveal the falsity of its claim on truth. Although this paper focuses upon the Potter series, it opens up the discussion of mass culture and the influence of religious ideology within the rest of American culture. In defamiliarizing one object of mass culture, I have exposed the processes that we all take for granted, yet that run our lives. In order to avoid being dupes at the hands of a capitalist society, we must always consider the origin and substantiations of the ideologies that regulate our culture. In short, through the words of Alistair Moody, we must maintain constant vigilance. Thank you.